It's week 13 of the NFL, and we give you our 3 best bets for this Sunday, and it all starts right now. Hey guys, it's Matt from Grandstand Bettors.com, and week 13 of the NFL starts this week. We have 3 best bets for you, which we'll get to in just a moment, but first, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss any of our NFL plays for the rest of the season. And while you're at it, smash that like button if you are ready for another fun-filled Sunday in the NFL. I know I am. So, without further ado, let's dive in to week number 13 and start with the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Detroit Lions in the 1 p.m. Eastern time slot. Lions, they're favored by 1 point at the moment. The over-under set at 51.5. Now, the Jags coming to this game on a high note from last week, beating the Ravens at home 28-27 after Justin Tucker missed a game-winning field goal at the end of regulation. Now, the Jags are 4-7 on the season, and they have a chance with a win this week to actually creep into second place in the AFC South. Trevor Lawrence has shown some great improvement on the season, throwing for 66 completion rate, 2,600 yards, but the most important thing is he has nearly a 3-1 TD to INT ratio and has protected the ball very well this season. Christian Kirk has been his go-to wide receiver on the year, who's caught almost half of all of Lawrence's TD passes. Now, what has this team playing well offensively for the most part, though, is a top 10 rushing attack led by Travis Etienne. Etienne has over 700 yards rushing and averages 5.5 yards per carry. When he comes out, James Robinson fills in very nicely. And don't forget, Lawrence can also run and extend plays down the field as well. Now, look for them this week to, again, lean on that rushing attack against the Lions, who have the 3rd worst rushing defense in the NFL. They're giving up 154 yards on the ground per game and has really struggled containing quarterbacks. Just last week, they gave up 78 yards to Josh Allen. Now, speaking of the Lions, they were this close on Thanksgiving to winning their 4th game in a row, and they just couldn't get it done against the Buffalo Bills. Even so, they still sit 4-7, which is good enough for second place in the NFC North. Jared Goff's season, it can be summed up in one word: mediocre. He has about 2,600 passing yards, not a great completion percentage. He does have 17 touchdowns to only 7 INTs, but his passing, sometimes you just kind of wonder. One thing you don't really have to wonder about, though, is who he likes to throw the football to. St. Brown has over 1/3 of all the passing yards that Goff has thrown, and he's been targeted twice more than any wide receiver on the team. Now, this team is putting up points, though. They're 8th best in the NFL with 25 points per game, and behind Williams and Swift, they have a top 10 rushing offense, nearly averaging 5 yards per carry as a team. Now, Jacksonville actually has a decent rushing defense, so look for Goff in this offense to air it out a bit more this week. But you have to ask yourself, if they have a top scoring offense in the league, how can they be this bad? Well, it's because they have the worst scoring defense in the NFL. They give up over 28 points per game. So what is our best bet in this matchup in week 13 between two subpar teams? Well, the question is, can the Detroit Lions defense outplay their offense for once? And, well, this week they might have a chance to do so. The Jags, they're awful on the road, 1-4, and the Lions at home actually are 3rd best in the NFL in scoring in the first quarter. We do think that Goff and the Lions have been a little bit of an underachieving team this year, rather than the Jags, who are kind of right on par with the progression from last season. The Lions, they're coming off 2 tough performances against the Bills and the Giants defensively, and this line here, I think, is a little bit of an overreaction from the Jags beating the Ravens last week. So, with our first pick of week 13, we're going to take the Detroit Lions -1 over the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, with our second matchup of week 13, we're going to take a look at the Dolphins versus 49ers in the 4 p.m. Eastern time slot. 49ers at the moment, 3.5-point favorites, and the over-under is set at 46.5. Dolphins, they come into this one on a 5-game win streak after beating the Texans last week, 30-15. Tua, most people would say, has looked like a very great quarterback this season, throwing for a 70% completion rate and 2,500 yards with a 6-to-1 TD to INT ratio. We'll get into our thoughts about Tua in just a bit, but no matter what you think about him and the entire Miami's offense and their organization, they're winning, and at the end of the day, they have a chance to win the AFC East. Tyreek Hill has been a star, and that is really an understatement. He has nearly half of the passing yards from Tua at 1,233 on the season. He just needs to average 122 yards per game for the rest of the season to break Calvin Johnson's single-season record. To be fair, Jalen Waddle has been just as great with nearly 1,000 yards on the season, but just no one talks about him because of what Hill has done for the Dolphins. Even with the 5th worst rushing offense in the NFL, this team still has the 3rd best total offense because of that passing attack. However, this week they are going to face the number 1 defense in the NFL, so maybe things won't be as easy as they have made it look in recent weeks. Speaking of the 49ers, this team has looked unbeatable essentially since they've traded for McCaffrey. They've won 4 straight games and now have overtaken the NFC West from the Seattle Seahawks. Jimmy G done well, throwing for 240 yards per game, 16 TDs with only 4 interceptions on the year. Honestly, their passing game has a whole team effort behind it. 8 different wide receivers have had a touchdown, and 5 different receivers have over 30 targets or more. This has led the team to be top 10 in passing in the NFL, but we all know that their top 10 rushing attack is what has made them great. It's not that the team rushes all over you. It's that you just don't know where they're going to rush from. Wilson, McCaffrey, Mitchell, Samuel all have over 200 yards rushing on the season, and this week they're going to need to be sneaky as well against the Dolphins defense. On a side note, Mitchell is out and McCaffrey was limited in practice, so it is important to keep an eye on those injuries as we move forward into Sunday. Now the Dolphins, they have a top 10 rushing defense, and last week they only gave up 36 yards on the ground on 14 carries to Pierce. So, what is our best bet for this matchup between 2 first-place teams in Week 13? Well, we're going to now tell you what we think of Tua. He sucks. Come at us. Tua sucks. If anyone wants to put this guy on a pedestal and name him MVP, come on, get out of here. Go ahead. We're not buying it. The Dolphins, in their 5-game win streak, they beat the Steelers, the Lions, the Bears, the Browns, and the Texans. Those teams are a combined 16-39-1 on the season, and not one of them has won more than 4 games. If you want to dive into the Dolphins season even more, they're only 2-3 against teams with a winning record. Now, I know you can only play the teams that you have on your schedule, so I'm not going to fault Tua and the Dolphins for putting up huge numbers on those bad teams, but I'm just going to leave you with this. The Dolphins are frauds, and they can be exposed again this week against San Francisco. So with our second best bet of week number 13 in the NFL, we're going to take the 49ers minus 3.5 points over the Dolphins. Now, before we get into our final pick of Week 13 in the NFL, just a reminder, if you want all of our NFL plays, head on over to grandstandbettors.com, become part of our family, and start living that grandstand life. But we do have one more best bet here for Week 13, and it's in the Chargers-Raiders game, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time slot. Raiders at the moment, they're 1-point favorites with the over-under set at 49.5. The Chargers, they come into this matchup 6-5 in the AFC West, which honestly was probably the most overhyped division in sports all year. They're coming off a nail-biting win, the Chargers, against the Cardinals last week, which still gives themselves a chance here to make the playoffs entering Week 13. Herbert has thrown for over 3,000 yards on the season already with 19 touchdowns, and with injuries to Allen and Williams for most of the season, Palmer has been the go-to wideout for Herbert. I'll be honest, as much as I call Tua and the Dolphins a fraud, the Chargers team starting to border that. The only reason, honestly, I haven't called them fraudulent yet is because they have consistent injuries with key players on the team. The only thing that keeps them in games is their passing attack. Austin Eckler and this rushing offense, 3rd worst in the NFL with less than 86 yards on the ground per game. The good news is that Vegas has the 7th worst secondary in the NFL. They're giving up over 300 yards per game through the air, also at home. Now, this is where the Chargers actually thrived in that Week 1 victory over the Raiders. Herbert in that game threw for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. So let's talk about the Raiders for a second. Despite beating the Seahawks last week, they're still only 4-7 on the season. And after getting Devontae Adams, you'd think they'd have a better offense at this point, but they haven't. Derek Carr has been a little bit of a reason why he struggled to be accurate, but Adams was a good pickup for him. Adams has 1,000 yards on the year, 10 touchdowns on the season, and is a huge vertical threat to throw down the field, as the guy's averaging 14 yards per catch with 15 plays over 20 yards this season. But this passing offense has been mediocre at best, and where they have really had their success this season has been in the rushing game. It's just a one-horse show, too. Josh Jacobs has almost 1,200 yards on the season and accounts for 85% of all the rushing yards that the Raiders have. The only reason why the Raiders won last week was because of a massive 229 rushing yards on the ground, including an 84-yard walk-off touchdown by Josh Jacobs. Now this week, they get to face a bad rushing defense with the Chargers giving up over 151 per game, which is 5th worst in the league. So look for them to go back to Jacobs and keep going to that well until it runs dry. So what is our best bet for this AFC West matchup? Well, as we mentioned, the Chargers won week 1, 24-19, and you might argue with us, well, hey, Mike Williams played in that one. He's not going to play in this one. Well, in week 1, honestly, he only had 2 catches for 10 yards, was a non-factor in that one. This week, though, should still be close. The Chargers, they have 6 wins on the season, and they've won all those games by just a combined 24 points. If you actually take out the Texans win, they have 5 wins by just a combined 14 points. The Raiders, they have now won 2 in a row, and they may be changing the narrative of their season, but honestly, can you trust Derek Carr and this Raiders passing game to make big plays when they need to? Look for Herbert to have a field day against the Raiders secondary, regardless of who he's throwing the football to. And the Raiders, they just gave up 328 yards to Geno Smith. And look for the Chargers' rush defense to lean back on their week 1 scheme on how to stop Josh Jacobs. Remember, he only had 60 yards rushing in that one. So this may be another OT nail-biter, but we think Justin Herbert and the Chargers will continue to go towards a playoff push. And our best bet for week 13 here, our final best bet, is going to be Chargers +1 over the Raiders. Well, that does it for us here at Grandstand Bettors. As always, sit back, relax, have a great weekend, enjoy championship football on Saturday and all of the NFL on Sunday. And we will see you live right here on YouTube for Browns vs. Texans, the return of Deshaun Watson.